Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. Simplify life with diabetes. By the only ultra-rapid acting inhaled insulin. And by Dexcom. Help make knowledge your superpower with the Dexcom G7 continuous glucose monitoring system.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
This week, learning more about the features of the upcoming Dexcom G7. It's in front of the FDA right now, but it is out in Europe. There are some significant changes to the system, including what's basically a pretty long snooze for essential alarms, including the urgent low.
When you know your alert is going off, you know you're low, and you don't want to get reminded, this was based off of very significant customer feedback. You've already been notified, you've already acknowledged it, and it's going to continue to remind you. And you're like, I don't need the reminder right now, I know, I've dealt with it.
That's Dexcom's Chief Technology Officer, Jake Leach. He answers your questions about the adhesive, direct-to-watch, accuracy, and he even mentions the G8. This podcast is not intended as medical advice. If you have those kinds of questions, please contact your healthcare provider. Welcome to another week of the show. Always so glad to have you here. We aim to educate and inspire about diabetes with a focus on people who use insulin. I am your host, Stacey Sims, and I was looking through the information for this episode, talking about the G7, and I realized we just passed the 4-year anniversary of the G6. It was approved in March of 2018, but we received it a couple of months later. I know because Facebook reminded me. It came up in my memories. Dexcom had sent us the G6 at the time, really early on, which was great. But Benny wanted to go see Avengers Infinity War. We had tickets to that movie, and then we got the G6. And, it was one of those things where you bought for a particular show, like a time. So we had to be there. And I think we had our priorities straight. We saw the movie, we came home, and we put on the G6. And that was 4 years ago. There is so much interest in the G7. Of course, anytime we do an episode on new technology, especially with Dexcom, I get a lot of new listeners. So welcome if that's you. I do have to give you a couple of notes before we start the interview. All right, there is some presumed knowledge here. I hate to do that, but I have limited time with these executives. So I have to decide whether to stop the interview, right, to explain things like MARD. You'll hear Jake Leach talk about that. That's all about accuracy. The lower the better, things like that. So if you're not familiar with a lot of these terms, you might want to go back and listen to the other interviews we've done with Dexcom. We've done a lot of recent interviews over the last couple of years where we go more in depth into some of these features. I will link those up in the show notes. You can always go to diabetes-connections.com and enter Dexcom or G7 or G6 in the search box. And I will come back after the interview. I want to explain a couple of things that I think go by really fast that we kind of shorthand. So stick around for that, please. As always, I'll note that Dexcom is a longtime sponsor of the show, but they don't pay for the interview, just the ad that you will hear later on, and they don't tell me what to say or what to ask. Okay, my interview with Jake Leach, Executive Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at Dexcom in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is also brought to you by Afrezza. And when it comes right down to it, there hasn't been a lot of innovation for insulin. Sure, there are different brands, but nothing really unique when it comes to insulin delivery, except for Afrezza. Afrezza is unique because it is the only ultra-rapid acting inhaled insulin available. It starts working quickly without the need for injections at mealtime. Once you breathe Afrezza into your lungs using the inhaler, insulin appears in your bloodstream in less than 1 minute, and it may start reducing blood sugar in about 12 minutes. Find out more and see if Afrezza is right for you. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Afrezza logo. Afrezza can cause serious side effects, including sudden lung problems and low potassium, and is not for patients with chronic lung disease, such as asthma or COPD, or for patients allergic to insulin. Tell your doctor if you ever smoked, have ever had kidney or liver problems, a history of lung cancer, or if you are pregnant or breastfeeding. Most common side effects are low blood sugar, cough, and sore throat. Severe low blood sugar can be fatal. Do not replace long-acting insulin with Afrezza. Afrezza is not for use to treat diabetic ketoacidosis. Please see full prescribing information, including boxed warning, medication guide, and instructions for use at afrezza.com/safety. Jake, welcome back. Thanks so much for joining me and spending some time with my listeners. As always, we have a laundry list of questions for you, but I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Stacey. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, well, just coming off of ATTD, How was everything received? G7 launch in Europe. Nice to have a show in person, a conference in person after all this time. How was ATTD?
Well, lots going on. ATT was a wonderful meeting for us. We are launching G7 in Europe now, doing our limited launch. We've got our Dexcom One product, which is for now, and now with the Dexcom One, we have a portfolio of products to support many different customers across the globe. And so really looking to expand access to CGM for all the people that could benefit.
Let's start right there if we could. When I hear portfolio of products, forgive me, I start thinking about the stock market and investors and all that kind of stuff. But talk to me about the portfolio of products as it pertains to the people who use it, because Dexcom One is very limited, right? Are you planning to bring that to the US or expand into other countries?
Well, first of all, what it's really about is getting access for customers to Dexcom CGM. So one of the things outside the United States is access to G6. In some markets, it's only accessible by people who are considered at higher risk. So these are folks that have hypoglycemia unawareness, or children, pediatrics, right, caregivers. And so those were the only people that had access to Dexcom CGM. So what Dexcom One does is it brings in, it's a simpler product. It doesn't have automated insulin delivery capabilities. It's not doesn't have all of the alert programming features as G7, but it's a really simple, approachable product for a large population of people who have never experienced life without finger sticks, right? This is their first experience with CGM real time. They've never had access to anything like it. So that's really what Dexcom One is about. We launched it in the BEL countries, Bulgaria, Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, and just tremendous response from customers who are using CGM for the very first time. One of the things we did with the product was we completely redesigned the mobile app that goes with it. So it's based on G6 hardware, but it has a new mobile app, and a big focus of that was the onboarding process of how you get CGM started. In these countries, it's actually Dexcom One has access through e-commerce. So it's on a website. You go, you purchase the product, you get it, and then you start it up, do your own training and start it up. And we wanted to make sure that we continue to enhance that onboarding experience. So there's a lot about the mobile app that just walks you through exactly how to get up and running quickly. And so that's been a great benefit.
I'm sure. And we have lots of other things to talk about, but I don't want to leave this yet because we are, as a US-centric podcast, it reminds me of back in 2013 when we started on what was the G4 Pediatric Platinum or Platinum Pediatric. And you do go from finger sticks to seeing this whole wide world. Of course, there was no phone app that I remember. It was a receiver at the time. But there are still a lot of people in the US who would like something a little bit more affordable, order it from the website, don't need all the bells and whistles. So I'll ask again, any plans to expand where Dexcom One goes?
Definitely looking to expand Dexcom One. We're early in its launch phases. The most recent countries is in the United Kingdom as well as in Spain. So a large population just got access in Spain to Dexcom One. So we're launching that here in the next couple of months. So we are looking to expand it around the globe. In the United States, there's actually pretty good coverage for the G6 and soon to be G7 products. So we'll continue to look and see if it makes sense to bring it there. G7 does have a new receiver. We've actually found, some, like you mentioned, some customers like the simplicity of, maybe not using a mobile app. They just like the receiver. So we did actually have a whole brand new receiver design that goes along with G7 that's also available on Dexcom One. So that, if that's what the customer chooses, that's what they get.
All right, let's talk G7 because it seemed like there were a few more features talked about at ATTD that I hadn't seen before. Can you tell me a little bit about this grace period that you're allowing now?
Sure. Yeah. So a lot of the features that are in G7 are based on user feedback, particularly in our mobile application and our receiver. So the grace period is the idea of, if you put your sensor in at 4:00 on Monday, exactly 10 days later, which is G6, it's going to tell you your sensor's expired. Well, it gives you a little bit of advance warning, but at 4 o'clock, 10 days later, it's going to shut off, right? And you no longer get glucose readings. So the concept with grace period is let's allow another 12 hours of flexibility so that when you can choose the time that's convenient for you to replace your sensor. So you're not having to replace it early. Like let's say, losing half a day because it's more convenient to replace that sensor in the morning. You can literally wait 12 hours and do it. And so with the performance in the clinical studies, we studied the performance of the product all the way through 10 and a half days. So it's reliable and accurate out through that grace period. So automated insulin delivery, everything continues to work during that period. It adds significant flexibility for users to decide when they want to change their sensor.
I'm sure you can't answer this, but how long did it go? Was it 10 and a half days? Was that just when you guys decided, okay, this has got to be it? Was it 12 and a half days, but you weren't happy with the results then? Like how long did it stay accurate?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we've got sensors that can stay accurate for, weeks at a time. The way that we look at it though is, we want reliable performance out to the full length of days for almost all customers, right? Every so often you have a sensor, it doesn't last the whole time or it falls off, but we're really looking at the vast majority of people getting the full time. And so as we've had to develop new technologies to ensure that occurs. So we have new patches that are in the works for G7. We've got some new sensor probe technology that extends the life of the probe out to 15 days on a reliable basis, right? A lot, people could potentially get longer performance out of sensors, but not reliably, past the 10-day mark. So that's why G7 was designed to go farther, and the current product is at 10 days. It's not necessarily an accuracy, because we do understand when the sensor starts to not perform accurately. We know what those signatures look like, and we actually that's what the sensor fail comes from. Is we're saying, okay, look, the sensor's not accurate, and it's not looking like it's going to come back based on the signatures we see. So we shut it off, and so that's what we want to extend all the way out past the 10 and a half days. But we're real happy with where G7 is from a kind of cost perspective as well as performance.
Yeah, and let's talk about that performance. Can you start? I want to talk more. Let's talk about accuracy because it looks great. Let's start though. I want to ask you about the very beginning of it. How does it do those first 24 hours? Was that different from the G6?
No, so it's so basically CGM in general, there's a little more variability on that first day. You've got a wound response that's going on to the sensor insertion. And so that's generally what causes some variability on day one. So we're seeing good performance from G7 on day one, slightly higher MARD than the average, but not much. And the MARD on G7, both in pediatrics and adults, one of the things at ATTD was we did publish the pediatric data. And so, you're 8.1, 8.2% MARDs. And so, the best MARD from a pivotal trial CE marked product that we've seen. So very excited about the performance improvements. It is a new enhanced sensor and algorithm that goes with it with G7. So it's not just G6 reboxed. It is a new. We've taken everything we've learned over the last couple of decades of making sensors and developing them, put it into G7.
Those lucky Europeans wearing it on their arms. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because the G7 has been submitted to the FDA in the US for alternate site use. First, if you wouldn't mind explaining what that means. And then just talk about the accuracy, if you could. Does it vary depending on where people wear it? Right back to Jake answering my question. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Omnipod. And when you're deciding on a brand of insulin pump, there are a lot of things to think about, especially if you've never used a pump before. It can seem overwhelming. There are a lot of choices, and you want to make the right decision. That's why I'm so excited to tell you about the Omnipod Dash free trial. Curious about trying an insulin pump or seeing what life without tubes is all about? You can now try Omnipod Dash free for 30 days. The trial comes with no commitment or obligation. Not right for you? No problem. Terms and conditions apply. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Omnipod logo. For full safety, risk information, and free trial terms and conditions, also visit omnipod.com/diabetesconnections. Now back to Jake answering my question about accuracy depending on where you put your sensor.
Yeah, great question, Stacey. So a couple things. G6 is actually approved for arm wear outside the US as well. And G7 is approved for both abdominal and arm. And really what that was about was we ran our pivotal studies for studying the performance of the product in both the arm and the abdomen and in the upper buttocks. So we do look at the performance across those. The performance in the abdomen arm are similar, but we are seeing better performance in the arm location in a large clinical study that was powered for each. So we do feel like there's good accuracy in both locations, but the arm tends to do a little better on average. And so excited about being able to produce that level of performance.
Was there any difference in the pediatric population in terms of location?
It was similar. Yeah. It was a little better in the arm, very similar to the adults though, which is really, a testament to the design of the product. It is similar performance in the arm for peds. And so, yeah, we studied both arm and abdomen for peds as well as upper buttocks for some of those younger kids.
Again, I don't know if you can answer this question, but as a mom of a kid who's been wearing a Dexcom since he was 9 and has had diabetes since he was 2, we have always found that the fattiest place possible, right, is the best location for a Dexcom sensor to go. And that changes at different ages. Anecdotally, I've heard that confirmed throughout the community, but I've never had it confirmed by you guys. Is that something that is for real?
One of the things about G7 that is different than G6 is the sensor is quite a bit shorter. So it's a vertical insertion instead of the angle, 45-degree angle, and the depth of insertion is less. We've found in studying it that like in the arm, there's more comfort with the length of the sensor probe. So this isn't a validated point, but my expectation is that we're going to see that the sensor is both comfortable and performs well in locations that don't require as much tissue as you're mentioning, because of just the sensor probe length change, which was very deliberate because we wanted to, some folks with G6 in the arm, it's not as comfortable for them. And so we wanted to build a product that, we're always seeking to make it as minimally invasive as possible. So the sensor probe length being smaller and shorter is really helped with that.
As you listen to this podcast, we have shared photos of the G7 before, and you can see it looks very different. I'm curious, Jake, the insertion process, talk to me a little bit, if you could, about what that feels like. Does it feel significantly different from the G6? Because going from G5 to G6 was a different feel for the person wearing it. I'm curious if there's a similar change.
It's definitely an improvement. It's less steps for G7. So I'll walk you through a couple of the differences. One is that the device in the box, when you take G7 out of the box, the actual sterile pack is the applicator. So the applicator is not in an extra bubble wrap. So actually, more environmentally friendly. It's smaller. And so you take the cap off and there's no adhesive to peel off. There's no liner. It's already ready to go. So sticky side down. And so you basically press the applicator against the body, but there is still a button, just like G6 is, where you press the button to actually initiate the sensor application. But you do have to press it down on the body because there's a safety guard that doesn't allow you to fire the applicator until it's pressed against the body's surface. So one of the nice things about G7 is you can actually kind of move it around, right? With G6, you peel it off and then you stick it on and it's stuck there. G7, you can actually move it around and decide you really are in the place you want. And then you push it down and then that basically loads it. And then you can press the button and it fires. A very similar action of automatic sensor insertion and the needle's retracted very, very quickly, leaving the sensor behind. So, from that perspective, it kind of sounds the same, makes a similar noise, but, click sound, it's just less steps. And it's kind of amazing when you pull the applicator off, the sensor's on, it has the built-in electronics that measure the sensor and send the signals to the phone. So there's no more steps. So you're there. And then another enhancement we've made with G7 is we actually provide an over tape for every single product. So the over patch comes with every product. If you want to use it, you can put it on top.
Let's talk about adhesive then. Is the adhesive the same as it was for the G6? I know you continue to improve that. I know you continue to change that because the community, and there's always people who have irritations.
Yeah, it is different. It's enhanced. One of the things that's different about G7 from G6 is the sterilization method we use is a little different. So it's a ethylene oxide. So that really opened up some opportunities for us to use some different adhesives that are not stable when you sterilize them with E-beam. It's a very technical detail, but what it did really with G7 is it allows us to open up our aperture on the opportunities for patch. And so this is a new patch for us. It's very similar. It looks the same as a G6 patch, but it doesn't have some of the components that we've found have caused some of those irritations with G6. We've worked to ensure that this product, we actually even did a study in folks that were sensitive to G6 adhesives. We did a study with G7, didn't see any issue there with this adhesive. So as expected, we feel like, irritation is going to be minimal, if any.
Fingers crossed. Again, I said at the beginning, we have a laundry list. I'm going to try to shoot through as many as I can. Talk to me a little bit about what I think I read from ATD, which was this grace period for silencing alarms that you could not in the past. Silencing urgent low, silencing sensor fail. Is that what I read?
Yeah. So in that product that's available in Europe, there's a silence all feature, which basically a user can go through a number of steps to turn off all alerts for a period of time. And it basically what it's about is when you know your alert is going off, you know you're low, and you don't want to get reminded. This was based off of very significant customer feedback. You've already been notified, you've already acknowledged it, and it's going to continue to remind you. And you're like, I don't need the reminder right now. I know I've dealt with it, or I'm dealing with it. I've done my treatment and my glucose is going to respond. So you can actually silence it. So that is a mode that's in the product that customers are really asking for. And so something we made in the initial version.
I'm curious, as the person who has followed for many years, I was always wondering why there isn't more in that app, because there's nothing like getting your 6-year-old an iPhone and then your phone doesn't get the alerts that you need, not just where the blood glucose is, but when is the sensor going to stop working? What's the transmitter situation? Any additions to follow coming?
Yes, it's all about priorities. So our priority within our software development team was to get G7 out the door and globally, with all the different language packs, translations, all the things we have to do for international launch. But we have, even just speaking about G7, we have a cadence of release trains, as we call them, that we want to bring new impactful features to customers as fast as we can. So we've been evolving how we develop our software. Follow is also on that list of software that we want to continue to bring new features to. Right now, the priority has been on getting G6 and Dexcom One out, getting people access to those products. But Follow, definitely, there's a whole host of features that I want to see implemented in Follow, with better notification for why you're not getting glucose readings as a follower, the ability to acknowledge things within the Follow app so you can understand that the user who you're following took action, they acknowledged that alert, so just that kind of bi-directional feedback. So that's something we do want to implement in the product.
I mentioned the 6-year-old with the iPhone, but it's really the problem is when they're like 9 to 14, and then they just stop communicating, or they're like, whatever, mom, so yes, yeah. Please, user acknowledge. That would go a long way for parental communication.
Exactly.
Oh, what about compression lows with G7? Are those improved? I know you've been testing on that.
Yes, we've been following it. And so compression lows still can occur, right? When the sensors compress. We haven't studied it statistically to the point where I can say it's better on G7 than it is on G6, but it is a smaller wearable. And so, theoretically, you would expect it to potentially be better, but I don't have validated data to say it is better. But it is one of those things that we've seen. The convenience of wearing it in the arm and the smaller size basically allows people to wear it in areas where they maybe not going to lay on it as much. But, all of that's pretty anecdotal at this point. But we are interested as we roll the product out to continue to look at it.
I don't know if you can answer this question, but I saw at ATTD several presentations from clinicians who were talking about adoption of CGM in the type 1 population. And I saw people talking about, and I saw one person say 60% of people with type 1 now wear some kind of CGM. I saw someone else say 80%. These are astounding numbers. They don't sound right to me. I'm curious if your internal research is saying the same.
It depends on the different, where in the world you're talking about, that kind of utilization. Then also probably customer segments. Those are pretty high numbers. I think we'd love to get there, and we think we can, right, with CGM adoption around the world. But those numbers are definitely higher than a type 1 population as we see it today, even in the United States. But clearly, everybody should be on CGM that is on intensive insulin, even basal insulin. We did our mobile study showing that, if you're on basal insulin, 1 shot per day, significant improvement in time and range if you wear CGM continuously. And so that's a population that we're very focused on trying to open up access for, because there's significant benefit there for them.
All right. I have a weird one for you. I'm in a lot of Facebook groups, as you can imagine, very active on social media. And I see a lot in these mom groups that sensor number 9117 has become something, it's taken a life of its own. It's a sensor nobody wants. Now, we are very fortunate. We have had no issues with, we've been using G6 since it came out. we so rarely have sensor failure. I'm going to knock wood everywhere. Benny always makes it to 10 days. Like it's not something I worry about. 9117 has never thrown us for a loop. Are you getting this feedback? Has anybody brought this to your attention?
Potentially. Not, I personally haven't heard about it, but we do have teams, our tech support is tied in very closely with our teams that monitor product performance in the field. And so I haven't heard about that specifically, but that 9117 is a calibration code. We have a number of codes that are basically programmed factory information into the calibration of the product. So I'll look at that one though. I hadn't heard of that one, Stacey, but we'll take a look at it. I've never heard that one particular code fails more often than another. Those are the types of metrics that we do look at, but certainly is the complaint that they fail or that they're not accurate or both?
I'm pretty sure it's that they fail.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But I will, how about this? I'll look into it a little bit more. I'll send you some posts anonymously. Like I'll take names out. And then if you get any feedback, you can send me.
Awesome. Yeah, we love to hear feedback. We do monitor product performance pretty extensively, but very happy to hear from customers.
Another thing that you touched on earlier, and kind of maybe it goes to the same subject, as I said, we're very lucky. I think Benny's body responds well. I don't know what it is. I don't want to get too personal about him. But it does seem that in these 15 years plus we've been in the community, that different people's bodies obviously respond differently. Is there any scientific information that you have found in terms of I don't know if it's electricity or body composition? Obviously, this is way beyond my ken here. But have you found that different people's bodies, there's just some people who Dexcom works great for, others not so much?
Yeah. So, the variability, so this was interesting in the, many decades of CGM development, some of the earlier products there's a lot of variability just in the sensor itself. So if you took that sensor and you put it in a beaker of glucose, it's going to measure slightly different than another sensor. And there's some more variability there. And over time, what we've done is with all the different generations, continually focused on the materials we use in the sensor and the way we manufacture them. And then, with G6 bringing the factory calibration. So if I take a glucose sensor today, a G6, a G7, and I test them, on a benchtop environment, they're all going to be perfectly lined up. All those sensors work great. The difference is when you go, and one of the things actually that makes CGM so challenging in developing that technology is that once you go in vivo, so once it goes into living tissue, there's a wound response. The body reacts to that sensor insertion site. And so over time, we've made significant progress on minimizing the body's reaction to that sensor, but it can still occur. And that's where you get some variability around, different people may have slightly different experiences. Part of it's the physiology. Early on, some of our original products, there were about 25% of the population that it didn't work for at all. They got significant noise. And it was just a problem. And that particular issue was around enhancing the materials we were using so that we had less response to those sensors. And so that was a very early, almost 20 years ago type of an issue, but one of those ones we've solved over time. And we still work on continuing to study and better understand that wound response and how do you impact it. There is some variability, but over time, the newer technologies have continued to improve it.
I didn't ask about this because it doesn't seem that anything has changed. All of the pumps that Dexcom currently partners with will eventually, once the Dexcom G7 is approved, will work with the G7 in the future. This is something you and I have talked about before. No changes there, I assume.
Yeah, no changes. G6 is the only iCGM that's approved for automated insulin delivery integrations, and G7's following in that line. And we've already started working with our pump partners on the integration of the G7 technology. There are enhancements in G7, both it's an upgraded Bluetooth. So each of the pump partners has to do some upgrades on their side to be compatible with G7. And then basically there's a regulatory submission for them to get the G7 approved for use. But with that iCGM designation and the iController and all the things that the FDA has helped facilitate with the industry, makes it a lot easier to do this upgrade. So I think we all kind of foresaw the point where we're going to continue to upgrade sensor technology and algorithm technologies. And we're now, have two products integrated with G6 with Omnipod 5 and Control IQ, and look forward to continuing to, integrate with more products and advance the automated insulin delivery technology as well.
Tell me a little bit more about enhanced Bluetooth, because when I hear that, I think, well, right now, Tandem tells people to wear their pump and their Dexcom on the same side of the body. Is that something that might be improved in terms of more flexibility? Because the Bluetooth has to reach it, I guess.
Yeah, Bluetooth technology. So the antenna designs, all of those, we're always trying to optimize them for the best performance you can. Specifically, though, G7 is designed with capability to have the direct to watch functionality. That's the CGM communicating directly to an Apple Watch. And so we built that into the G7 Bluetooth technology. So we had to adapt the way that we do our Bluetooth so that we could support that. That functionality is not available in the initial G7. Again, priority and timing getting the product out, but it is in our roadmap and something we're excited to bring to market. It's been this long journey around ensuring that the Apple Watch functions as a proper receiver. And I would have to say that I think particularly ourselves, we've been surprised at how many things we find as we look at how to make that system work very reliably and make sure all customers understand. Because when you do that, that watch becomes your primary alert device. And there's a lot of different aspects of the mobile platforms and even the watch platform that we had to get right, working closely with Apple to ensure that it can support that. So more to come soon on that.
Well, I was going to ask about direct to watch. I wasn't going to let you leave without asking about that.
I know.
Yeah. But really, though, to go back, the enhanced Bluetooth means the direct to watch capability. Enhanced Bluetooth does not mean like it magically goes through water now.
No,
or it communicates better with the pumps, things like that.
No, it's the same Bluetooth kind of power antenna type technologies. I think, with the wear of G7 on the arm and some of the other things that it's opened up, I think we may see some improved performance, but it's not a substantial difference in terms of the Bluetooth antennas and designs, but very excited about capabilities for direct to watch.
I got a question about recycling. You mentioned this is a smaller pile of plastic at the end. Any thoughts of a recycling program?
We've actually looked at it a few times, and it's one of the things that we've actually focused. It's possible to do that, but kind of the concept of shipping products back and forth and recycling them and then treating them, and actually the way the recyclers actually deal with the plastics that come from biohazard. So what we focused on is let's make the product footprint, both the packaging and the plastic utilized, as small as possible. So if you actually look at G7, the package is 67% smaller than a G6 package. The applicator is smaller. The receiver box is dramatically smaller than the G6 receiver, all in a focus of minimizing that footprint. And as we look towards our next generation products with G8 and the next platforms, we're also looking at further reducing environmental footprint, because it is a very important aspect of producing the technology, is paying attention to its footprint.
I wasn't going to ask you what's next. You said G8. What's G8?
Well, I can't say anything about it, but it's going to be another enhancement in both wearable and user experience. That's what we do this for. So we have a healthy program running and looking at continuing to drive, making the product easier to use, continuing to improve.
Are you going to have to build a whole new production line like you did from G6 to G7 for G8?
No, we've learned quite a bit about how to continue to enhance technologies. And one of the decision points we do about choosing technologies has to do with how quickly can we scale it for users. G7, we're able to scale even faster than G6. Even with G6, we've doubled our capacity in the last couple of years twice. So, managing through that with the G6 platform. And so G7, we're intending to take in even much bigger ways. It is a consideration, particularly given the scale we're at now. But no, we won't have to redo everything, but we'll have to redo some of it.
I'm envisioning, because, we've been talking for a very long time, you and I. And I remember, size of a penny, maybe, flesh colored. So I'm thinking like, the things that, my cartoon version in my brain, the things that make the G7, we'll just make those a little smaller, like a candy factory.
That's right. That's actually, if you watch a G7 production line, it's amazing. The product just, they're just popping out, materials go on one end and G7s come out the other. It's pretty exciting to watch.
Before I let you go, I mentioned very early on, this is a US-centric podcast, of course. We have listeners all over the world. I've already had people in Australia, outside of Europe, asking when is G7 going to be submitted or released here? Any news for those folks?
So our intent is to bring G7 to the global markets even faster than we did G6. I mean, over 3 years, we launched G6 into many countries, and G7, the intent is to launch it as fast as we can. So as we build up capacity and get the regulatory approvals. And so it's coming. I can't speak about specific timing, but rest assured, we're moving as fast as we can.
All right. And then last question. Kevin Sayer said recently, the company CEO, he was speaking to a group of investors and said, FDA approval after ADA scientific sessions. Now, I know nobody puts a date on anything. Do you think he meant like way after?
No.
Or do you think he meant like on the plane home? He's coming home from New Orleans from ADA and he's going to get that ding. What do you think?
It's hard. It's super hard to predict. I've been doing this a long time. Regulatory approval or regulatory timelines are always one of those ones that you never like. G6 got approved faster than we thought. G7 is going along really well, back and forth with the FDA with our questions and answers. That's pretty typical. We've done this a lot of times. But yeah, I think based on where we are in the review and how much the FDA has gotten through so far, we still have a little more to go. So we're predicting that it's sometime after ADA. We don't want to even have expectations that we get it, but you never know, right? It's one of these things that, the regulatory agencies, they do their work, they do it well, but it's a little unpredictable. So, but we do plan to launch G7 in a meaningful way this year in the US. So we're not talking about December 31st approval.
I understand. We won't hold you to that.
But
could be.
Can't predict.
Did I miss anything that you wanted to make sure to mention?
I think we covered it. The concept of Dexcom One, a global product portfolio, it's really something that we're leaning into and growing access for glucose sensing, continuous glucose sensing worldwide. We've had wonderful success in the US, but there is a lot of people out there that could benefit and don't have access. So that's one of the things we're pushing. And I think we covered a lot of the G7 features. There's still a few that we didn't cover, but users will find out soon enough.
Jake, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate you spending so much time with me.
That was great. Thanks, Stacey.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Lots more information at diabetes-connections.com. Every episode has its own page on that website. You can also check into the show notes, whatever app you are using. Some of the apps are not great at displaying the show notes, so I always like to send you back to the main homepage. I want to clarify a couple of things here. I mentioned that at the beginning of the show that it was going to go by fast, and we might have shorthanded a couple of things. Right at the end there, I mentioned Dexcom CEO Kevin Sayer, on the plane from New Orleans. What I meant by that, if it wasn't clear, the ADA Scientific Sessions meeting is in early June in New Orleans, and Sayer had mentioned in a recent talk that he expected FDA approval after that meeting. I'm sure he didn't mean exactly after that meeting, but I did want to ask about that because I thought that was a little telling. Wouldn't it be great if it was that quick? But we shall see. Most experts, most predictions I have seen say at the earliest, the third quarter of 2022 for Dexcom G7 approval, but it's tough to predict that stuff. Also, you'll notice that I didn't go in depth talking about Dexcom's pump partners. As we have talked about many times in previous interviews, if your pump system uses Dexcom or integrates with Dexcom, they are already working on compatibility with the G7. In the US, that is the Tandem t:slim X2 and Omnipod 5, which has been in limited release but is rolling out now to wider users. So Omnipod 5 will launch with G6, and then they'll move everyone over eventually. With Tandem, it will be much as it was for other changes. Tandem has been integrated with Dexcom since the G5, but with Tandem, you plug it into the computer and you update it that way. You don't need any new hardware. Integration with the pumps is honestly probably a matter of months after approval, not years, if past performance is any indication. But you're not going to get anybody to go on the record about that. But if you use a pump that is currently integrated with the G6, they are already working on this. I don't think it's as easy as flipping a switch, right? But they're working on it and it will not be long. As soon as it's approved, I guarantee Tandem and Omnipod will put out news releases and we will make sure that you know all about it. Any other questions, please send them my way. I'm going to talk to these guys again before too long. And if you are in one of those groups with that 9117 sensor, we have never had any trouble with it, but I'm going to be posting there. I want to hear from you. So let me know if you have a 9117 story or you think there are other sensors that are problematic and you've noted a particular number. Definitely reach out and let me know. I'm going to send all of those to Jake Leach in the next week or so. All right, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. So I was watching TV the other night. I was watching Moon Knight. I highly recommend it. I think it's one of the better Disney Plus shows out there. And I just really enjoyed it. Not familiar with the character at all. Anyway, I was watching Moon Knight and I got a Dexcom alert. And Benny was upstairs in his room. And it takes me back to the days when we basically had blood sugar checks on a timer. We would check doing a finger stick the same time every day at home and at school and whatever extra we needed to. It really is amazing to think about how much our diabetes management has changed with Share and Follow. I didn't have to stop what we were watching, get up and check on him. I knew what was going on. I could decide whether to text him or go up and help him out. Using the Share and Follow apps have really helped us to talk less about diabetes, which I never thought would happen with a teenager. And he loves that part too. That's what's so great about the Dexcom system. I think for the caregiver or the spouse or the friend, you can help the person with diabetes manage in the way that works for your individual situation. Internet connectivity is required to access Dexcom Follow. Separate Follow app required. Learn more at dexcom.com/compatibility. Go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Couple of events coming up. I am excited to say I will be in Greensboro, North Carolina next Sunday. I guess that's this Sunday with JDRF. That's May 15th. Have your chapters been doing this? It's kind of like a combo walk kickoff summit, and they're outside. So fingers crossed that the weather is good because I don't have a tent or anything like that. So I'll be there, really excited to see people I haven't seen in a couple of years. I had a Greensboro event. I think that was supposed to be in late March or April of 2020. So I'm really excited. Of course, it didn't happen. I'm really excited to go and see them. And then ADA, as I mentioned, is in early June. I have a press pass for that for the very first time. It is virtual, which is why I got the press pass. I'd like to go to ADA at some point, but my daughter is just coming home from New Orleans and we were just there visiting and going to Jazz Fest. So I really don't want to turn around and go to New Orleans again in June, especially because she's going to be home. So I put in for the press pass for the first time and got it. So I'm excited about that. Hopefully I'll use it in person in years to come. So I'll let you know what's going on at ADA. Just like ATTD, a lot of new studies and information comes out of that conference. And next week on the show, we are scheduled to have Beta Bionics. They are talking about their studies that they released at ATTD. This is with the iLet. Right now, it is an insulin-only pump. But as you'll recall, this is a dual-chambered pump. It is designed to have insulin and glucagon in it. We have been talking about it, I think, for as long as the show's been on. I mean, it's been around for longer than that, but Beta Bionics as a company was founded in 2015. So a lot more to come on that. And jump into the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group, to ask your questions of Beta Bionics and anybody else. That's usually where I ask for questions so then I can pass them along to these CEOs and CTOs as we talk to Jake this week. And I should add, if you're here till the end, I really appreciate you. Got a lot of questions about my health. I did have an allergic reaction to a medication not too long ago. It was very difficult to talk. I'm so much better. I would say I'm 90 to 95% healed. My seasonal allergies, though, which took a pause, thankfully, during that time, have really kicked back in. So I still sound like I'm kind of scratchy and stuff like that. But there's so much pollen here. There's green. My car is green. It's amazing. But I am feeling a lot better, and I really appreciate all the messages. Thanks so much for that. Thank you, as always, to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here soon. Until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.